Hi friends, Max Elhash here. On this episode of the Corpus Animus podcast, I have training think tank coach Kyle Ruth on to talk about blood flow restriction, also called BFR. If you're on the go and you want to listen to just the audio version, subscribe to the Corpus Animus podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you want to learn more about becoming a professional coach, check out our interactive educational platform, The Classroom. Get a free 7-day trial at trainingthinktank.com/classroom trial.
What are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about
points.
The Kyle Ruth hype cycle has been on BFR training for how long?
2018.
2000. So it's been 2 years of compressing yourself with external tools.
Since every podcast that I've ever been on, they are always like, tell us your story. So I'll tell you my
name is Kyle Ruth and I am a BFR addict.
Yeah. My story of BFR, I literally read about this for the first time in 2005. Katsu training. Yeah. I couldn't spell that for you, but it was Japanese blood flow restriction training with like really narrow tourniquets.
Yeah.
I read about it and I saw all this really interesting research on like walking and elderly people growing muscle. And I was a competitive swimmer at the time. I was like, I'm going to grow my triceps with this. I did one session.
Hold on. This was in 2005.
2005, maybe 2006.
Okay.
Okay.
You're dating yourself.
Yeah.
Old man.
Yeah, I am that. 15 years ago. And so I tried it and I was like, I'm never doing that again. That was stupid. Like I didn't get anything out of it. Fast forward.
One exposure is generally enough to get a consensus opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And I was literally using like, I was using these little elastic, like wrist
rubber
wraps.
bands.
No, like wrist wraps, like elastic wrist wrap.
Yeah.
To do it. And I was putting that around my upper arm. So you can imagine that I was definitely getting adequate.
Yeah. Definitely enough compression.
Clearly I was within that, 50 to 80% LOP range.
Yeah.
Definitely nailed it. No. So the next time that I came back to it was actually after I had knee surgery in 2015 and my left leg was atrophying. And I was like, I don't want my left leg to be atrophying. I think I was competing in the open in like a month and a half. And I was like, dude, I have to do something right now that's gonna make a difference. So while I was doing my rehab, I just started doing voodoo floss, like doing my leg extensions, leg curls, my bike with voodoo floss BFR. At that point, I probably was getting enough, maybe too much.
Yeah, too much
tension.
occlusion. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I did it, and whether or not it had an impact, anecdotal like N of 1, but I was back doing, you were coaching me at the time.
Yeah.
I was back to doing friggin' pistols.
By the open.
Well before the open.
Yeah.
And I had that surgery probably in January and open was a typical February. So like, did I retain strength? Maybe. Did I retain some muscle endurance? Maybe. My best workout was the thruster row that year. Like something you wouldn't expect. So I don't know if you could take that as anecdotal evidence or not, but at least that was an exposure to it. And then fast forward to 2018, one of my friends, Jordan Asciano and his friend, Nick Rolnick, they were like, hey, we're coming through Atlanta. We want to stop by your house. And, we're into this BFR stuff. So they sat down and talked to me for a while. And I was like,
their business is like the BFR guys or something.
BFR. Yeah. The BFR pros.
Okay.
And they brought some real cuffs. They brought, it was a set of smart cuffs and, we talked for a long time and I could immediately see the potential applications for CrossFitters, for deloads. Go ahead.
As you're going through this, can you make sure that at some point in your narrative, you explain what BFR is? Because we're a couple minutes in and there might be some people who all you've said is Katsu now, I think. So just give like the basic rundown.
All right. So really quick, blood flow. Essentially what they did is we use this cuff, right? Exactly like a blood pressure cuff. It's pneumatic. You inflate it, put it around the top of the limb, like the top of your thigh or your upper arm. And you increase the pressure until the point that you either completely restrict blood flow in and out of the limb, or you're just cutting off some degree of that blood flow. So that's one of the keys to adequate blood flow or good blood flow restriction training is
the right pressure,
getting that pressure correct. So I talked to these guys for a long time and like, I saw how much value there could be in this, right? So number one, they were saying you can create these temporary states of hypoxia where in the tissue, so you put the cuff on your upper arm and then your bicep, tricep, forearm, all those tissues can get down to very low oxygen states, which is something that drives a lot of adaptation.
Which is what happens when you train.
It's what happens when you do bodybuilding work a lot, or if you took someone to altitude and did strength training or something like that. Like you're essentially, I don't want to say recreating altitude. That's like a big misnomer, but you're creating a local hypoxic environment, which drives training adaptations.
Sprinting potentially too, right?
Sprinting, especially on things like an assault bike or running, sprinting. I don't think it would be as much the case with like
rowing.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm sure you have athletes that could drive down to 0% muscle oxygen saturation, but I don't think that that's like super common.
Yeah,
especially in rowing training. But I saw the value, right? You take an athlete and without having them sprint, you can drive these hypoxic states. I'm like, man, there's some real big potential here for working with athletes. You can use it in deload periods, use it when athletes are injured. You know, if they can't do heavy back squats. Well, there's some really strong evidence. This was 2018. There was really strong evidence for hypertrophy and strength adaptation and all these things with low loads. You know, you could have people potentially working with 20 to 30% of their 1RM and getting strength improvement and getting, you know, maintaining muscle mass. So like you look at that as a coach, as someone who works with performance athletes who occasionally have back tweaks and, you know, tweak their knee doing this.
More than occasionally.
Yeah. Especially when you're working with a wide group of high-level, high-performing athletes. You're like, dude, this is a tool that allows us to make it so those periods of time where training is decreased, whether through injury, fatigue, post-competition, regardless of the reason that training volume or intensity is reduced, it allows you to keep training adaptation. So I got really excited about it. I ended up buying myself a set of cuffs. I started playing around with it. And at the time, I would say the protocols I was going through were very stupid. I was overinflating the cuffs. I was using pressures that were probably higher, potentially counterproductive. And I was doing, you know, the intensities that I was using on a lot of the stuff. I was using weights that were too heavy. I was riding the assault bike too fast. But I was learning a lot through that process. And at the same time, I was, you know, in communication with those guys at Bfr pros and talking about like what might be an optimal load here, what might be optimal pressures. And I was just learning, reading research and things like that. And I got to the point that I felt confident enough to start applying it with some of my athletes, some of the people in person, and saw some really, really incredible hypertrophy adaptations. And I primarily started using it with actually Becky, one of the TTT coaches, and her leg muscle mass grew so fast after she got her cuffs and we started going through some hypertrophy work. It was pretty rapid. And it was very clear that like that degree of muscle mass adaptation couldn't be had with the way that we had been training up to that point, given how much like cycling and you know, rowing and other things that she was doing at the time. Like it was a pretty rapid change. And go ahead.
During your presentation, so Kyle presented on Bfr to our staff meeting as part of his series for the classroom and just as part of our continuing education for just training think tank coaches. And as he was doing it, I started to feel very insecure about my knowledge base because I'm like, you know, I've heard about this and I've read a lot of research, but this is one training tool that I personally have never really used. I think I've done one Bfr session where I really just found out what my occlusive pressures were on my legs, but I never actually did a training session. And it made me feel very insecure. And I was like, what fits within my training goals that I don't feel could really negatively impact everything that I'm working on currently? And I'm going to do a calf hypertrophy program that...
Well, I know based on your training that one of the things you're trying to do is develop local muscle endurance in the calves, right?
Just like bounding endurance.
Yeah. So expand on that a little bit. What do you mean when you say bounding?
So for me, my body weight generally hovers between like 224 and 234, depending on my food and how much I'm training and how much I'm training in a very short period of time, because I fluctuate pretty heavily. And, you know, for the sport, that is obviously not good for anything body weight related, but I just happen to be a little bit better and more gifted at gymnastics stuff than like box jumps, double unders, even on bar facing burpees. I feel like my burpee endurance, if it's just normal burpees to like a jump, is better than bar facing where I have to jump over the bar and land on the other side.
Even though it's a really small jump.
It seems like it's not that much, but it actually ends up blowing my heart rate up a lot. And I think, you know, just in observation of myself in video versus other people, you can just see the like springy, elastic like nature of my lower leg is just not that good. Even if you watch me when I was playing football, I was a pretty good jumper. I think I was like a mid-9 broad jump and a 32-inch vertical at 240. So it's like, that's
a lot of power.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty good, but it always was a very hip dominant jump. Whereas the best jumpers seemed to it almost seemed like they would hip extend. And then right at the last minute, they would push into the ground with their feet. And it would be like, that is the terminal point of speed. And I never really had that. So I just was like, okay, I need to go on some sort of a bounding specific plan to make this better if I want to compete. So I took some of Brandon's actual plyometric strength program, and then Mia writes me 2 days a week of bounding, training for CrossFit specifically.
Bounding density is what it looks like.
Yeah. And volume building. And then Ryan wrote me a lower leg structure with the Mobo board to improve my ankle mechanics. And then I was thinking to just add that in. So it basically still fits within my training program and gives me exposure to BFR as a training tool.
What do you think, Kyle? Will it work?
Well, that's kind of where I wanted to go, right?
Probably not.
So yesterday in the staff meeting, I talked about some of the potential applications. What can you expect? What do we know can potentially happen? So first off, we know that we
Hopefully
can get
bigger fucking calves.
number one, we know we can drive.
Can I pause you real quick?
Go.
And maybe this is a mistake, but can you just really quickly give me a laundry list of the miraculous quote unquote things that this has achieved for you already as a coach? So now everyone listening can be like, damn, it did this. And then we can hear what you're saying.
BFR saved my life.
Yeah, no,
just a quick list.
I think we're going to talk about myself. So these aren't things that everyone should expect. This is what it's done for me. So number one, adding BFR training, I had this chronic adductor strain that happened at the 2013 regionals that literally plagued me all the way to 2018. Within a few sessions of doing BFR squats and adding BFR, for some reason that went away, and it's been away permanently. I've had no more issue with that chronic adductor strain.
Bam, number one.
Yeah.
BFR helps you with rehab.
I don't have a good explanation for it. My gut instinct tells me that potentially I'm driving more blood flow to that, maybe got some hypertrophy in a tissue that wasn't being used. And when you put BFR on your legs, your adductors get constricted big time relative to the rest of the tissue. So maybe that hit it. Tore my hamstring really bad last summer in August. And I used BFR in the rehab. That hamstring's now at least the same size as the left. My right is the same size as my left, maybe bigger from all the BFR rehab work that I did. I started doing that as soon as I was out of pain. So as soon as my hamstring didn't hurt anymore, I started going BFR rehab like crazy. And actually one of the interesting things is during that time, I wasn't doing any strength training. I wasn't squatting. I wasn't deadlifting. I wasn't doing RDLs. I literally wasn't doing any lower body strength training, but my weight on the scale, I gained 6 pounds of muscle mass in that span of time from doing unloaded leg extensions, leg curls, literally sitting down with BFR, relatively high pressures, around 80% of my LOP, and just doing high volume leg extensions, leg curls.
Bam, number two.
I was literally going to say, bam, hold on, let me do muscle mass.
Yeah, man. So hypertrophy when someone was injured, there's that thing.
Maintenance of muscle mass during downtimes and training.
Yep. At Masters Fitness Collective Championships that I just competed in, I used the Bfr Ipc Protocol, which I'm going to talk about. So obviously you probably don't know what that is, but I'll go into what that is. I use that before my warm-up, before every single event, except for the last one, because at that point I was done.
So effective warm-ups for your warm-ups to become a Masters champion.
Number three.
Number three. Wait, you said you wanted 4?
That was 3.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll leave it at 3 so I can.
Don't you have something with your clients too?
We can talk a little bit about
just a bullet point. We can go in the story later.
There's some evidence that it accelerates bone growth in bone fractures. Now, keep in mind, this can't be a compound fracture where it's an open fracture. It has to be a closed fracture. But there's some evidence that it accelerates bone growth. So people with stress fractures,
I think feet and wrists, maybe from a lot of handstand walking and overhead work.
Yeah. So there's some good evidence for that. Cedric Lapointe broke his wrist at the 2018 games. We applied some BFR after that with his doctor's approval.
Will used it for his hand as well.
Yep. I'm not sure Will got himself. Will Moore.
Yeah. We'll just use him anyway.
Yeah. He did his own thing. But used that BFR Ipc protocol, and both of them were back.
Fast healers with, who knows if it was, but that kind of ties into point number 1, which is rehab.
Yeah. It's a great rehab tool.
Do you have any others to add? I've been counting on my fingers as if I would lose count.
That was 4. So, a potential rehab tool to maintain muscle mass, a a great tool for warming up, and then hypertrophy.
Perfect. Now back to Max's baby calves.
Yeah.
And how you can make them better.
Well, first off, so let's think about what we can do with BFR, what we know it does, not necessarily what my experience was.
Yeah.
You're not rehabbing a calf, so we'll just take that one off the list. I think first and foremost, hypertrophy for your calves is not necessarily going to make your bounding better, right? So that hypertrophy means more muscle mass. More muscle mass means you have to perfuse that. But one of the cool things about BFR is that the muscle mass that it does grow, it's also growing capillary density in unison. So, if you were to go out and follow a traditional hypertrophy protocol, there's no guarantees that you're also delivering more blood and oxygen to the tissues. The cool thing with BFR is that we do know you're increasing the delivery of blood and oxygen to those tissues while you're building new muscle mass. So it would be a way to potentially make more enduring muscle tissue in your calves if that's what you're training. So that would be one tool that I would potentially use it for. Protocols for that would be really simple. It would be like a 30, 15, 15, 15. So that's 30 reps, rest a minute, 15, rest a minute, 15, rest a minute, 15, rest a minute.
Of like calf raises.
Calf raises. I would even do them maybe a little bit dynamically, right? So maybe toes on a platform or something like that. And then rhythmic.
Bouncing almost.
Yeah, rhythmic bouncing simply because of what you're trying to get the adaptation to become. Versus if you were just trying to grow calf tissue, then I'd be like 2-0, 2-0 tempo with BFR, slow and control. But that would be one way to do it. Moderate pressures for that. And then the other thing we know that BFR can prevent some muscle damage if you use it beforehand. So if you do that Ipc ischemic preconditioning protocol, you can prevent some muscle tissue damage from high volumes of eccentric contractions. Right? Well, what is a bunch of bounding? What is a bunch of double unders, a bunch of box jumps and all that stuff? It's a bunch of high volume eccentric contractions. So doing that Ipc protocol, which is literally, it's as simple as it sounds. You put the cuffs on at 100% of your occlusion pressure, leave them on for 5 minutes. You don't
break this down for us.
Yeah. So Ipc, it's ischemic preconditioning. Essentially you're cutting off blood flow to the limb for 5 minutes, right?
Kind of like if you went into, get your blood pressure done, right?
Yeah, it would feel very similar to that, except it's extended for 5 minutes. So it gets really uncomfortable by the end of that 5 minutes. You leave it on at 100% of your occlusion pressure, which we would determine individually for you.
Do you have your cuffs?
What does that? I didn't bring my cuffs.
Oh man.
What does that mean though? Right so 100% limb occlusion pressure is essentially the pressure that cuts off all arterial inflow and venous outflow from the limb. That means no blood's getting in and no blood's getting out.
Yeah. So there's basically like a hose, muscle, and a hose, and your blood is pumping from your heart, and the maximum occlusive pressure is basically the amount of pressure that's required to shut the hose so no blood is coming into the muscle belly.
Right. And you don't actually, so when you're doing BFR training in a controlled manner with cuffs, you never have to go above someone's 100% LOP. That doesn't make any sense because at that point you're just applying pressure for no extra benefit. Yeah. It's like a little more isn't better in this case.
And each limb or place you'd put it and each person is different for finding that pressure.
Yeah. So this is a really important point is that your left and right leg are likely going to have different LOPs just due to the tension that you carry and how much, how much capillary density you have in each of them and things like that. Your upper body is going to be much lower than your lower body. The thicker the muscle mass, the more pressure is required.
Does body fat change it?
Yeah, body fat. There's some evidence that it does. I'm not entirely sure which direction, if it would drive it up or down, but I know that thicker muscle tissue does require more pressure to.
So you would think like at some point you'd have to, if it's thicker because of body fat, you'd also have to squeeze through that to get to the muscle belly. I mean, that's just where my logic is. I don't know if that's right.
So those are some of the big things, and then also you have to keep in mind the cuff width. So when we're using pneumatic cuffs that you can inflate, a narrow cuff, like a 2 or 3 inch cuff, you're going to have to require a much higher pressure than you would if you were using a wider cuff. So if you have a 4 or 4.5 inch cuff, that's going to require less pressure to cut off all blood flow than a more narrow cuff. The higher the pressure. So when you have that narrow cuff, it creates higher pressures, more risk for like bruising and some of the minor but present side effects of BFR.
So how do you find that maximum occlusive pressure?
Well, there's a bunch of different ways. The most common way is to use a Doppler. So like it's just like a little tool that measures the sound that basically of your blood flow going through the arteries and the veins. And when you apply the cuff, you just listen for that. And as you slowly increase pressure, eventually you won't hear that anymore. Once you don't hear that,
That's when
you're at 100% occlusion pressure.
And then you look at whatever the pressure is on there, and that's the number that you need, and you always use that as your reference. So if it's 70% of that or 50% of that.
Yes. And
so let me pause you right here. Yeah, this all sounds like a lot of stuff you have to buy the cuffs, you have to buy the Doppler.
Well, I wouldn't recommend doing it with a Doppler, just to put this out here. The Doppler's like the gold standard, but there's cheaper ways to do it. If you
nonetheless, you still have to get the cheaper thing. So you were saying you haven't messed with this yet. So my thought is you'd probably be like, man, I want to try this, but this is a lot of crap I got to get.
Yeah.
Are you saying that it's worth it? Sell me on getting over that hump of like, man, that's a lot of crap to get.
I'm saying if you are a competitive athlete where competitive CrossFit is your thing, right? Whether it's your profession or whatever, but if that's something that you're extremely passionate about, you probably would spend $300 on like a massage gun. That massage gun has no evidence that it's actually going to help you recover from anything that you do. But there is very strong evidence that we can use BFR in places to augment your performance.
I think people are buying those massage guns for multiple purposes, if you know what I'm saying.
I do know what you're saying, Chris. I guess I can't compete. BFR can't compete with that. I'm sorry.
It can.
You could do the guy from Kill Bill.
Yeah, the autoerotic.
Yeah, there you go. So you can get the massage gun.
Do not do that. And if you do it, do not say that you learned it on this podcast.
Disclaimer.
I did BFR on my neck.
I think people spend a lot of money on crap that doesn't do anything for them. I mean, you'd go through most people's supplement cabinets and you can see hundreds and hundreds of dollars that they spent on, honestly, just junk
or stuff that they don't actually stay continuous taking.
Yeah. So I think there's that aspect. And if you look at it, like BFR cuffs are something that you buy one time, right? Yeah. It would be something that you would have a one-time purchase. You're looking anywhere between $150 and like $400, depending on
the quality.
Yeah. I like.
Do we have a discount code?
We should. Get
I wish
one.
we need to get in cahoots with somebody. But
I love that word, cahoots.
So that's sort of the price range that you're looking at. But once you've got it, like you've got it. It's something you can use. Basically, I've had the first set of cuffs that I got now for 2.5 years. No issues with them. I got another set of cuffs so that I could have them on. I could have someone else training with them if I wanted to.
So I
would say, to answer his question, he asked if it was worth it. I would say, yes, the answer is worth it. But in order to make it worth it, you have to be disciplined and actually use it on a regular basis, research.
Put your thing down, flip it and reverse it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know what he's talking about.
Chris. Yeah. I would say it's worth it if you're a competitive athlete because of the potential advantages.
Or a bodybuilder.
If you're someone who is very invested in body composition, it gives you an opportunity to potentially augment a lot of the things that you're already doing. And it gives you the opportunity to have you could do 3-week BFR protocol and then go back to your normal training for 6 weeks and then do a 3-week BFR stimulative or like shock protocol or something like that. And then go back into your normal training. So it gives you some training variance as a bodybuilder. If you're just someone interested in general health, if you get hurt, go to your PT and use their BFR cuffs because they're going to have them. That's my take.
Okay. So where were we?
You were talking about getting
Ipc,
the pressures.
Yeah. So once we've established your max occlusive pressure, using whatever various tools that we would use to do that, then we would take you through a 5-minute passive ischemic preconditioning protocol where we cut off blood flow. After we cut off blood flow at the 5-minute mark, we're going to release it and we're going to let blood and oxygen come back into the limb for 3 to 5 minutes.
Maybe we could do this as a session video and I could talk through it. So if I put it, if I'm doing my calves, I put it, I'll keep it entertaining. I'll just make fun of Chris.
To do this, ideally, you're going to do 3 rounds of 5 minutes of you not doing anything with 100%. The only thing
I don't know. People might like just seeing how you put it on and
we can maybe speed up the 5 minutes.
It will be a boring video, but maybe they want to see it.
Yeah, we could at least walk through the process of putting it on and talking, and maybe find your max occlusive pressure. We'll use an SpO2 monitor since that's probably the most available thing. You can also, Evan loves his Moxie. You can use a Moxie to determine max occlusive pressure.
See him sitting there and petting his little precious Moxie.
So would it go over
it would go right under my knee if I'm trying to do it on my calf.
Yes, that's a really, really important thing. The cuff always goes at the most proximal part of the limb, which means if you're trying to do your calves, it's going up on your thigh, right?
Okay.
You're going to move it up as high up on your thighs.
No matter what.
No matter what. So when you put a cuff more distal, when you put it like below the knee, you're running the risk of vascular and nerve injury. So you want to keep it in the thick part of the muscle tissue. When you're putting it on your upper body, you want to do it like sort of in that dent between your delt and your bicep, like try and get it way up there as high as you can. And also, like, the other thing to keep in mind is an interesting thing about BFR. We don't really know why this happens, but there's downstream effects. So everything that's downstream from the cuff is going to be impacted. And then there's also oddly upstream effects. So like if you have, in some of the research, they have people do BFR like leg press. And yeah, they get hypertrophy of the quads and hamstrings and calves, but they also get hypertrophy of the glutes, which are not restricted. So there's something else going on that, so like if you're doing work for your delts, you want to grow your delts, you can still do BFR and expect the muscle that's immediately proximal to the cuff to still have some hypertrophy. Benefit. In fact, they've even found that if they do BFR on one leg, that the other leg is growing not to the same degree, but more than it would if it was uncuffed BFR.
But they have, more than if it was uncuffed.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's odd.
So my ischemic protocol, I'd be up on my thigh, even though I'm trying to get my calf.
Yep.
I get my max occlusive pressure. And then what am I doing for 5 minutes?
Nothing.
Like I literally just sit there?
You just sit. Oh. You could foam roll your upper back.
Could I do like little calf pulses, or I literally don't want to move?
So that's the thing, is you don't want to move. If you're moving, then you're potentially going to be exhausting energy storage. You're going to be creating metabolites, and you're not trying to do that during the IPC. Okay. What you're trying to do during an IPC is literally just cut off blood flow so that you have this sort of protective effect afterwards, so that when you do your training, you are not creating as much muscle damage during those, the bounding and things like that. Now,
So 5 minutes.
3 minutes rest, 3 sets.
Wow, it's a pretty long time.
Yeah,
I need to start it in my office before I go out there.
I will say, before the Masters Fitness Collective, I was only doing 1 to 2 bouts of that because I was a little bit short on time. So basically the flow for me, and this is odd, and I hate to say this, but like I really didn't get that. My lower body, because I was only doing lower body, didn't get that sore. My upper body got extremely sore, but I wasn't doing BFR IPC on my upper body. Again, anecdotal, but it's the first time I've had an opportunity to go compete and actually, put this into practice. So that was one of the things I was doing. I was doing 1 to 2 bouts before everything. And then I would go through my foam rolling and all that stuff. Then I'd actually go to the venue, warm up for the event, compete. There's some evidence that the protective effects last between like 60 minutes to 2 hours. So if you're going to do this, it would need to be somewhere in that 60-minute to 2 hour window. Like, before you go train, you usually go in your office and you're putting your socks on. What I would do is like kill 2 birds with 1 stone. When you're in your office, put them on, wander around, do your stuff, keep them on for 5 minutes. At the 5-minute mark, deflate them, go out to the gym, do a little warm up, put them back on, do another 5 minutes, passive or work on your upper body or wrist mobility or something, take them off, go do your session.
Okay.
It's like set it and forget it. Right. So that would be one of the biggest ways that I would recommend using them. And I think that would potentially be the best place for you to use them with that goal.
Okay.
Right. Now, here's the caveat. We have no research to look at potentially the blunting of training effects from doing that. Right. So if you're reducing muscle damage and you're doing that for every single bounding session, there's a possibility that
I don't adapt to the bounding.
That you don't adapt. Like, yeah, you're making it so you can tolerate more volume in that specific training session, but is that going to have an impact on your long-term adaptation? So in that case, maybe BFR training, the sort of like rhythmic calf raises that we talked about might be a better option because that augments some of the muscle damage.
So what would that look like? So now I have my maximum occlusive pressure. Yeah. Let's just put an arbitrary number on it.
Okay. Let's 200. Say we'll call you 250.
Okay.
Because your legs are very muscular.
Okay. So 250 what?
250
gigawatts.
Gigawatts of power. Millimeters of mercury.
Okay. So that's the measuring system in the...
Yeah. It's just like a blood pressure cuff.
Okay.
Right? Measured the same way. So they're measuring, actually what they're measuring is arterial pressure.
Okay.
Same thing. So we set that, and now we're going to do those calf raises. So
I put it at 250.
No way. Okay. 100%. That would, so you could do that. I mean, there are protocols, there's research on that, but it's not what I would suggest that you do from a comfort and safety perspective. Okay. So you want to work at a much lower pressure than that, somewhere between that 50 to 80% range.
So 125 to 200.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. And what I would recommend, what I feel just based on my own experience, my LOP is between 220 and 230 on my two legs. And so I just set my cuffs at 160. That seems to be in, it's well within the range and seems to work well for most of the stuff that I'm doing. And then, so I would set you somewhere between that 150 and 170 mark based on whatever your LOP is. And then we would have you get after it, that 30, 15, 15, 15 protocol.
So I do 30 reps, rest a minute, 15 reps, rest a minute, 15 reps, done?
30, 15, 15, 15. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 3 sets of 15 after the 30 on 1 minute rest, and then I'm done.
Yeah. And my guess is that you would be in a lot of pain by the end of that. I mean, if you say you did that with a light bar, say you did that with like 45 pounds or something like that. My guess is that by the second set of 15, you'd be like, man, I'm not sure I really want to continue. By the last set of 15, it would be like, Max, you have to go do this. Like, this is the last set. Go over here. Like the rating of perceived exertion.
Can't wait to film that.
Oh yeah. What about like grip training, like hanging on a pull-up bar?
So another thing that there's some really interesting evidence for. I talked about this in the staff meeting yesterday with climbers. So they took elite climbers and they actually had them do the Ipc protocol and they improved their grip endurance. You're talking about people with the best grip in the entire world. And you did this little 5-minute passive times 3 sets. And now they have a better grip than they did already. Like that's why when I heard about BFR, I was like, this is really interesting.
I'm going to walk around with BFR cuffs on all the time now.
Well, then your limbs will fall off. So that's another key point. Like there is a limit
to the danger of A-type, like CrossFit mentality. Oh, it's like, ooh, pressure, give me more. I'll do more of it.
So if I put it around my neck, so your limit is going to be about 20 minutes
a day
of cuff time. Yeah. That's going to be your big limit.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you're running the risk for we'll call them adverse events.
Okay. Is there any other safety concerns that we should be taking into consideration?
Bring up that thing you said about the different bands you could use, or people using bands versus the cuffs.
Yeah. So
I think that's going to be the thing that happens the most.
Okay. So right now a lot of people know about BFR.
Yeah.
It's been a pretty hot topic in training. And I think what exists is you can go on Amazon and you can buy these cuffs that are essentially just a piece of elastic that you wrap around your arm and and you can create some restriction, or they have ones for legs as well.
Or like voodoo floss bands is what people use a lot.
There's voodoo floss. And actually of those options, my favorite are like powerlifting knee wraps, right? But what I'm going to say is that the problem with that is they've looked at people applying that. And typically the recommendation is, okay, for your lower body, anywhere between like 6 to 8 out of 10 tension. So
which is probably based off of 50 to 80% of occlusive pressure. It's like, well,
right.
If you take 60 to 80% of what you think your maximal tension is, it's probably around there.
There's research on this. It's called practical BFR. And they looked at, so like the ideal, when people wrap at 6 to 7, they're relatively close to the range that they want to be training in. But then further research a couple of years down the road looked at it, and people either over or underestimated 70%, that 7 out of 10 by 30% plus or minus, which means that they're either at 100, they're potentially at 100% of their occlusive pressure doing back squats, which is counterproductive, or they're well below the effective range and not getting anything out of BFR. And so I think that's something
Hit the green, Max, hit the green.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So most people who have tried BFR, like the first time I did, and they're like, man, this is not worth my time. They most likely were using bands. And if they're using bands, they most likely either underestimated or vastly overestimated their pressures. And as a result, they're not going to get the effects that they see in the research and that I was talking about. It's gotta be, I really recommend people get pneumatic cuffs and turn in their LOP and do it right. You do that, you're going to have a really effective training tool. You do it wrong, you're either not getting anything out of it or you're running the risk of hurting yourself.
And what are the risks of hurting yourself?
I mean, so for the
let's
two
say
most
I
common,
was just like, I'm going to do this myself and voodoo blast that.
Voodoo blast.
That's what we should call it.
Yeah. And I just way over tightened them well above my occlusive pressure and just did my protocols there. What?
I think the two biggest are nerve injury, so crushing the nerve literally. And then the second one is vascular injury. So those are the two big risks that you run are essentially just crushing your limb.
Both of those are not good.
Yeah, neither of those are good. Now, one of the common side effects of BFR is numbness in the limb, right? But when you're doing it right, when you're within those pressure ranges that I recommended, that is typically just a restriction of blood flow to that nerve. And once you take the cuff off, the numbness goes away. But I will say, if you do experience numbness when you're doing BFR work, you should stop.
Are there any cardiac ramifications or adaptations you get from that? Like my initial thought, and I'm not well-versed in the research like you are, but my thought process is like, all right, well, you're just increasing the amount of pressure your heart has to push against against a huge portion of your muscle mass. And like, is there anything that happens from an adaptation perspective or risks if you have heart issues?
So one of the when you're looking at doing BFR with a client, one of the big things that you're screening for is hypertension, right? Yeah. Does this person have high blood pressure? That's people with legit hypertension are contraindicated. They should not be doing BFR work. But one of the things that does happen for us healthy people that can do BFR is you get a little bit of an increase in stress on the heart, which is a positive thing, right? Yeah. It drives training adaptations. And in fact, with BFR and endurance training, one of the reasons that they think that we're seeing these big improvements in VO2 max, even in elite athletes, is that by applying the cuff and adding a little bit of extra pressure for the heart to push against, you're actually getting some cardiac adaptations that those athletes would otherwise not normally get. And so you're seeing, in the course of 4 or 6 weeks, 4 to 5% improvements in VO2 max. Crazy. And if you've read up on, I'm sure you've read some of the literature on not BFR, but VO2 max, like in an elite cyclist, getting a 4 or 5% improvement in VO2 max is like unheard of. There's no training tools that we know of that can really do that. But we're not at this point, I think from a literature perspective, we're not entirely sure why there are such potent central vascular and central cardiac changes to BFR. My guess is it's the increase in pressure. So, right, we're like you said, we're putting a restriction on the hose and the heart's still trying to push blood through that. Yeah. So it's definitely increasing the stress on the heart.
Can you do both the upper body and the lower body at the same time?
That's another one that's going to be contraindicated. You don't want to do
that's combined. 2 contraindicators in one podcast.
I can get one more in here, I'm sure. But yeah, one of the big concerns would be that you're not getting enough blood return to the heart. So if you do 100% occlusive pressure on your lower body and 100% occlusive pressure on your upper body, where's the blood that
coming
you're going
back from?
Yeah, you have to refill the heart with every beat, or else there are some serious complications with your heart. And where's the blood supposed to come from? It's not coming out of your arms and it's not coming out of your legs. So there's a problem there.
Got it.
Yeah. Safety stuff, like don't listen to this podcast and be like, man, I'm now a BFR expert. I know what the pressures I'm supposed to use are. I strongly recommend that people go do like a full-on BFR training course, go learn as much as you possibly can. One of the, Nick Rolnick, one of the guys that introduced me to BFR, he's got an online BFR training course. It's like 6 hours. And I would say when you go through that, then you are at the point where you wouldn't call yourself an expert, but you're like, man, I feel really confident about applying this with clients at this point.
I have another place.
Oh yeah. Well, I was going to say something different. You were probably going to say Kyle's.
Yeah. Well, you put a course together and you have external references and resources and guidelines for programming. At least, like, it might not be all inclusive enough for people, but if you check out the classroom, you could see that.
The classroom series will take you through what population is safe, what populations aren't safe, optimal pressures, how to find those pressures. I don't go a ton into cuff selection, just some basic guidelines and then some programming principles. Cause to be honest, I'm a coach. That's like, that's more my thing than, going into the science and application. Like I want to look at how can I use this to help athletes? How can I use this to help augment? Max comes to me, he wants to improve
his freaking calves jacked
bounding
better.
Is that the whole purpose of your bounding thing? You just want to get jacked calves?
Would that help me in the open?
You're probably going the wrong direction.
Jacked calves?
Seriously. But no, I think it's a tool that I looked at and I'm like, man, this is something that if I can learn a lot about it, I can really help clients achieve their goals in a way that I hadn't been able to do before.
Yeah. So mine was not the classroom. I had a whole different idea. So if we're really trying to nail safety for the cuffs, y'all know Creighton trains at Travis's gym. Yeah. He is friends with Bubba Sparks, or he knows Bubba Sparks.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking, get it right. Get it right, get it tight. So that's kind of like with the BFR. We can maybe hire him to do a commercial where it's like, get it right, get it right, get it tight, but don't get it too tight.
But don't get it too tight.
And we can spread awareness throughout the community.
BFR awareness.
I like it. Yeah.
I think it's
very practical education that'll make
And maybe he could help me get a grill. I've always wanted a grill.
Here's what I want to say. I think in the perception of BFR in the market right now is that it's a bodybuilding tool, right? That it's primarily for hypertrophy. But what I want to do is I want to tell people like, hey, there's some uses for this in elite CrossFit and in CrossFit performance, right? Rehab, like I said, endurance, hypertrophy, like targeted hypertrophy.
So sport performance, even outside of CrossFit then?
Yes, as well, but that's not necessarily my realm of stuff. But I work with CrossFitters primarily, and I saw how much potential value there was. And I just wanted to, I want to be able to get people to understand like there are tools out there that when you're hurt, you don't just have to sit around, right? There are things that you can do that are still moving you towards the direction of, whatever your goals are. But I also don't want to tell people too much because I want my athletes to still kick their asses. So
nice.
Two final things. So we'll film Max also has a final thing.
No, I was counting for you in case you forget.
Thank you. So we're going to film your session, hopefully, and maybe that'll be on the YouTubes at some point. But then also the other day you told me you were talking about hypertrophy. And what were you saying I should do for 6 weeks? Tell them that. So maybe we'll document this.
Here's my idea.
Can I be the cameraman for that?
Please.
Here's my idea for Chris. Right. So Chris is already, here's a thing that we should probably talk about here. If you have the opportunity to do high load resistance training, that's what I would recommend over BFR training, right? BFR is when you can't do high load training for whatever reason. Chris is already able to do plenty of high load resistance training right now, and he's trying to get jacked, right? So
keyword trying.
He's in the process of getting jacked. And one of the things he's doing is you're doing cardio, 3 days a week, right? 30 minutes on the bike?
4 to 5.
4 to 5 days on the bike. And what I suggested is that we take some of those 30-minute sessions, cut them down to 15 minutes, put the BFR cuffs on at 70% of his occlusive pressure, and let him grow some muscle mass while he's doing cardio. Those of you who abstain from cardio because you're worried that it's going to steal your gains have probably never read about all the interesting stuff they've done with cyclists and BFR. They take cyclists, they have them ride at like 50% of their heart rate max with 70% occlusive pressure, and their legs are growing. They're growing muscle mass. So take someone like Chris who's trying to get jacked.
And your hypothesis cardio is in 6 weeks we can do.
We'll put on.
We have the what's that thing in there called where we can kind of actually get some data.
Yeah, the in-body. Yeah, we'll use the in-body and we'll show some legit muscle growth in the lower body.
Okay, so we'll try that. And then the final thing we'll wrap up here, unless you have something else, is the thing everybody's been wondering.
How big are my calves?
No. Can you do the Bfr protocol?
What's the Bfr?
The blood flow restriction, big freaking rod protocol. Can you put it on the Johnson?
I knew that this is where this is going.
No, Chris, I'm sure that's possible. Sure.
If there's a 4-inch long cuff, there might be only a certain amount of people.
Come on, Kyle. Don't act like you haven't tried this.
Thanks, guys.
Let's totally deconstruct Kyle's legitimacy in the last minute of this podcast.
Sure, Chris. You're going to get lots of growth factors by
I guess it's kind of like a
penis pump type thing.
Well, I was thinking more like a cock ring.
Yeah, same.
But you can control
the pressure.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
that was fascinating, Chris.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm sorry for all of you who got to this point and had to listen to this, but Kyle, thanks for informing us on BFR. We will let you know how my calves go and how Chris's legs grow. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Calves grow.
Kyle's going to test out that Bfr.
Giving it a shot.
All right. See you guys.